mean, the upskirting law itself is clearly something which is a good law to bring in, because it's a ghastly thing for anybody to have to suffer from, a terrible thing for anyone to do, and it should be punishable by the criminal code. However, I think once you start complicating it with whether or not it's done for misogynistic reasons, doesn't that start to get a bit tricky?
Well, I don't think so. I don't really can kind of consider a way where upskirting wouldn't be done for misogynistic reasons.
Well, exactly. That's what I mean. So why add something into it which you'd have to then further prove?
Well, the amendment is going to say that it would need to be taken as an aggravating factor. So what this does is it recognises that the reason these crimes are committed against women is because they are women. In the same way that a racially motivated crime would be considered a race hate crime, or a homophobic crime would be considered a homophobic hate crime. So I think what this law allows us to do is actually name what happens to women in a really precise and specific way. We can call that what these men, and it's only some men, choose to do to women is an act of
thanks for pointing that out, Sean.
That's all right.
So, yeah, but the point is surely if you... I mean, I'll give you an example of how the hate crime rules have been kind of twisted. When I lived in Scotland, there was a bar fight between an Englishman and a Scotsman, OK? Now, in between the bar fight and the punches, the Englishman called the Scotsman a Scot, whatever. You know, you can't say the word on the radio. That became a hate crime, right? Now, that to me is nonsense.
Well, I mean, I can't, comment on a case that I don't really know about, but I think if you look at the kind of language that women put up with day in, day out in terms of harassment. I've been called various sexual insults while walking down the street. I've had men threaten to do sexual things to me while walking down the street, or describe to me what they wanted to do. Now, these are acts that are designed to intimidate women. They're designed to tell women that they don't have a place in public space. These kind of things started when I was 14 years old. That is not unusual. An awful lot of women will have similar stories from being a teenager, from being a child, of having to listen to this kind of language. Now, if we can call that misogyny, if we can actually name it as a misogynistic act, then that gives us a language to speak about what happens to women. And it gives us a language to say that it is not acceptable in the same way that homophobia, in the same way that racism.
Well, you're speaking about it now, and you can speak about it, and there's no reason why you can't call it misogyny. The difference, though, would be, presumably, if misogyny became a hate crime, you would be then able to, having witnessed somebody saying whatever it was they said to you, go straight to a police station, report them, and say that man has committed a hate crime. Now, can you imagine how difficult that would be to prove?
Well, I think, it wouldn't be any more difficult to prove than the laws we have around racist and homophobic hate crime or ableist hate crime. We already have these structures in place that say that certain kinds of acts, certain kinds of language towards minority groups are unacceptable. Of course, that hasn't.
You're not going to tell me women are a minority group now, are you?
No,
surely
I'm not. Obviously, we're actually the majority.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
So, we experience these acts on a daily basis. About 2/3 of women actually change their behaviour. They restrict their own freedoms in order to avoid this kind of harassment. I mean, that is not acceptable. That is not acceptable.
No, I agree. But I don't think by bringing in a law against misogyny that it's going to stop people from saying things. I mean, do you really think that people have stopped saying horrible things to certain minorities because of hate crime laws? I don't think they have.
Well, no, I mean, it's not going to change overnight, but I think it gives us a language to talk about what happens to women, and I think that's really important. And I think, you just need to look at some of the ways that, for example, domestic violence is reported. We recently had a case where a man who killed his wife was described as a decent man who snapped. Now, if we actually named that as misogynistic hate crime, it would mean that we could talk about these issues as crimes.
But you're talking about it now, Sean. You're talking about it now.
Well, of course, but I mean, in terms of a legal perspective, if we actually gave these things a name, and I think at the moment, women are taught from a very early age that, these kind of things will happen to us, that when we walk down the street, we have to be careful about what we're wearing, we have to be careful about walking on our own, we have to make sure we don't do X, Y, and Z. And so we grow up accepting street harassment as part of our normality, as part of our reality.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you seriously say you get harassed every single day, or pretty much most days?
Of course, I don't get harassed every single day. I mean, women, as in general, it's a daily occurrence. Every day some women will be harassed.
I'm sorry, it's not. It doesn't happen in my world, I'm afraid to say, or happy to say. And
I'm very happy for you, but unfortunately for a lot of women,
what is your definition? What is your definition of harassment? I mean, is it wolf whistling? I mean, should I run to the police if a man wolf whistles at me?
I mean, I think anything that is an act that is designed to intimidate a woman in public space is by definition harassment. In the same way, I spoke to a woman on the phone yesterday who was chased by a man in a pickup truck who were howling and barking at her as she walked down the street. I mean, in some ways, that is a kind of, one could call that wolf whistling.
Yeah, okay, I get that's not. I get that's not fun. But I mean, it's like but wolf whistling and a bloke saying, "All right, darling," outside of a van. I mean, should I report that to the police as a misogynistic hate crime?
I think it's just one of those things that really blurs the edges. I mean, I don't imagine that any woman is going to suddenly run to the police over wolf whistling, but we need to respect how women feel when these acts happen to them. And I think when you're a 14-year-old girl standing on a bus stop in your school uniform and a man wolf whistles at you, that's actually a difficult thing to deal with. Why should girls have to put up with that?
I agree with you. I don't think girls should have to put up with it.
You can see this happening all the time.
No, listen, I don't think girls should have to put up with it. I'm hoping that it is becoming less and less of an occurrence that would happen. I mean, somebody driving down a road barking at you is not something that I think most women have suffered from.
No.
Now, there are always going to be idiots out there.
Exactly.
But what I'm saying is that men, many of them are men. Some of them are women, in fact. But, I mean, we had the case the other day, did we not, the Notting Hill Carnival, of a police officer whose bottom was slapped by a woman.
Yeah.
And he complained that he did not go to work and expect to be sexually harassed. Now, he's at the Notting Hill Carnival, so I think we need perspective here. And I think, you have to also consider the intent. All I'm worried about here, Sian, is that, you're right to say that you should expect to be able to walk down the street unencumbered, that nobody should bother you. I've got a 27-year-old daughter who used to live in New York and used to get terrible harassment as she walked down the street. Men walking next to her for blocks at a time, and she would end up having to tell them to literally bugger off. I mean, no woman should have to put up with that. However, I really don't think the small number of men who do it will be stopped from doing it just because of a law that allows you to talk about it.
Well, I mean, maybe I've got a little bit more optimism than you do. I do think that if we have laws in place, that sends a very clear message to men and to women about what is and isn't acceptable. At the moment, it's not. I think if we, in the same way that we brought in hate crime laws about other issues, that sent a very clear message that it is not okay to shout racist abuse.
Yeah, but you know what? There's more horrible racism. Listen to me for a second, Sian. There's more horrible racism in this country now than there's ever been. And you might argue that's because hate crime has been introduced and people have started to resent other people because of the way that the laws have operated.
Well, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you as well, Sian, but you mentioning the race laws, I mean, I don't remember experiencing what Sian is describing. So are men getting worse in their relationship to women? And I think that probably is the case. And I think introducing these sort of laws are going to make male and female relationships even more of a minefield. I mean, it's like, most men aren't like this. Most men are fairly decent, husbands, sons, brothers. They're ordinary blokes trying to have an ordinary life. And now having a relationship, even talking to someone of the opposite sex, is a nightmare. You don't know what's right, what's wrong.
I have to completely disagree with you. And I actually find that argument incredibly offensive towards men. Like, men...
Don't worry, I'm not offended.
I was defending men. I was saying they're not all like that.
Men. And the fact is that most men know the difference between flirting, between approaching a woman in a bar and chatting to her.
Correct.
And they know the difference between that and harassment. And
no,
what we are talking about...
I disagree with you entirely. I think men are more nervous about talking to women. I mean, my husband's mate said, "All right, love," the other day, someone he worked with, and she made a complaint. And suddenly, "All right, love," is misogynistic hate crime.
Well, maybe she's just a weird woman. I mean, there are some weird women out there.
She was not having a good day. Yeah, fair
I mean,
enough.
that is the problem. But listen to this. This is a good quote. This is from Alison Pearson's column this morning, and she's basically her point is that Roxanne Pallett is proof that making misogyny a hate crime is a mistake. She says we want good men as our friends, not imaginary enemies, and I think that's a very, very clear statement. And I think she's right, Sian, and I think you've just made that point yourself inadvertently that most men do know the difference.
I didn't make it inadvertently. I made it very advertently.
Okay, well, I thought you made it inadvertently because I didn't think that was the point you were originally trying to make. But you can be nitpicky if you wish.
I'll stop being misogynistic.
No, I can't be misogynistic. It's impossible for me to be misogynistic because I love women, right? And I'm probably going to be now called out on that because by saying I love women, that clearly means that I hate them.
Yeah.
But the point is this, Sian, surely you can tell the difference between men who are scumbags who are going to be horrible to you on the street and men who are just basically pretty normal characters who quite like talking to women and flirting with women and going out with women and even maybe marrying women. Do you know what I mean? So when you create a law...
That's exactly the point I was making, the fact that men actually know the difference between flirting, conversation and harassment, and women know
Yes,
that difference as well. And we
but-
should be able to call it out when it's not
But
happening.
is misogyny not necessarily in the eye of the beholder? And if some woman
Exactly.
says, like Roxanne Pallett, I've been made to feel uncomfortable, even though she's a liar and a horrible woman, right? She has to be taken seriously by the police. If the police get a report of an assault on a woman, they have to arrest the man who is accused, regardless of whether that assault has actually taken place.
Well, I think, you're kind of merging a couple of issues here. The fact is there's 1.2 million incidents of domestic violence every single year.
Uh-huh.
The vast, vast majority of those are not reported to the police. In fact, a woman raped 35 times. She endures 35 assaults.
Well, how do you know
before she
that
goes
they've
to the
happened if
police.
they haven't been reported?
Because it's in the British Crime Survey. So the fact is, the idea of false accusations, they are just so minimal. And that doesn't mean when they happen, they aren't incredibly wrong and they need to be dealt with, and they need to be dealt with through the courts. But if we're going to talk about rates of domestic violence, the key issue, the really important issue, is the fact that 1.2 million people endure an incident of domestic violence.
All right, well, let me ask you a
every
straight
single
question,
year.
Sean. Let's make it simple for you, okay? What is the definition of misogyny, please?
The definition of misogyny is the dislike and the hatred of women because they are women.
And how do you prove that?
Well, you can prove that in the way that someone chooses to behave towards the women. So if, for example, you are walking down the street, this is what happened to me, and men tell you that they want you to drop their knickers and then chant a misogynistic swear word at you until you burst into tears, I would count that as misogyny.
Yeah, but they may not hate women. That doesn't mean they hate women, Sean. It might mean that they're horrible individuals and ghastly people.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
doesn't mean that they hate women. How do you
Yeah.
prove that?
And bursting into tears
think
isn't a good
you
idea
can-
either.
Well, one gets emotional when they get shouted at. I think that's a completely rational way to behave if you're
Yeah, but you
feeling
see
under
my
attack.
point, though. You see my point. You can't prove that that person who said those things to you hates women. How
It's a
can you
thought
prove
crime.
that?
It's a thought crime. You can't criminalise someone for thinking something.
Okay, I'm going to throw it back at you. How then do you prove whether something is a racist hate crime? How do you know when someone uses racial epithets that they are actually a racist and hate?
Well,
a
I don't think
minority
you
group?
can. I don't think you can. I think you can.
Okay.
I don't think racial hate crimes a particularly great idea either. But I mean, they've brought that
So
law
what's
in,
the
and
solution?
it has not changed anything. And as I said to you, if anything, it has created more racists.
So what do you do? How do you tackle these issues?
Well, I think that we have to educate men to be the ones who are not well behaved, the ones who do treat women badly. We have to educate them and make them behave properly. If I see a man abusing a woman in the street, I'll have a go at him. If I see
Well,
a man
that's good. I mean,
assaulting a woman on the tube, I'll have a go at him, and I have in the past shoved somebody away from a woman. That's because
and I
I'm a
think,
decent
this
guy.
is the good thing. This is there are so many areas that we agree on, and I think that's really important because I completely agree. We need better education. We need education on sex and relationships. We need education that looks at respect and consent, and that goes both ways. So I completely agree with you that one of the solutions to this is ensuring that we talk to young men and men of all ages,
Yeah.
and we talk to young women about how
I
we
think-
treat one another respectfully and with consent.
Yeah.
However, I also believe that a legal framework, something that says, for example, that
No,
upskirting
you can't
is
make it. No,
motivated.
listen. Well, upskirting
Upskirting
is
is
going
different. I
to
think
come
it's
into
different.
law, and I think
Yeah.
that is absolutely right and proper.
Yeah.
That it should be punishable by some kind of criminal code, as I said before. But complicating it by trying to add on some kind of secondary aspect to it, as in misogyny, which will not only complicate the prosecutions of those laws, but will also complicate the arrestability of certain
Yeah,
individuals.
absolutely.
And may indeed hold up the actual upskirting law coming into practice, is a mistake. Simple.
Well, I guess that's where we will have to disagree.
Okay.
And we're allowed to in this
And we
world.
are. Well,
Thankfully.
thank you very much indeed. A very lively debate, Sian. Thank you very
Thank
much
you,
indeed.
Sian.
Sian Norris, writer and journalist there. She has her view. I have my view. You have your
I
view.
do.
Somewhere in the middle is probably everybody else's view. We want to hear it. 0344 499 1000. I think it's a massive error to try and actually even, tell you what misogyny means, to actually define it. You can't do it. I
You
don't think
can't,
her
no.
definition at all works.
No, you can't. And you can't criminalise people for thinking something. An action is different, obviously. And I think the more legislation we have driving wedges between men and women,
Yeah.
it's dangerous. I think it's going to make men behave
Well,
more
like I say,
aggressively
I'm
towards
absolutely
women.
certain that there are more racists in this country now
Because of the
race hate
No,
crimes.
and I think this has the same effect.
Exactly
I
right.
really do.
We want to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. A couple of tweets here. Bob says, so is forcing women to cover their face with a veil a misogynistic crime? Well, I think you'd have even trouble dealing with that, wouldn't you? Because you wouldn't know whether somebody was forced to do it.
Well, she might be choosing to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Alex says there is already a law in place to protect women from harassment. It's called the harassment law and has a very low bar by all accounts. I would suspect these men, in inverted commas, dramas are actually quite inadequate, and thus this is often the only way they can engage with a pretty girl. Let's go to the phones and talk to Chris, who's in Chichester. Hello, Chris.
Dear Mike.
Yeah, very well, sir.
I'm going to echo what you've said. Firstly, what's the legal definition of misogyny? There isn't one,
no.
as far as I know. So we've got to make one up and leave it. Once you get in the definition, because I'm 32 years as a cop, you are actually going to run into problems.
Right.
And the second thing is, what about misandry? Why are we discriminated against? Oh, yeah. What about the guys? I know lots of guys that get... Well, I don't know lots of guys because I'm too old, but I know some guys who will tell you that they've been sexually harassed by a woman anyway. What's that all about then? I mean, why are women being singled out?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you are going to make a law making misogyny illegal, then you're absolutely right. You have to do the opposite.
It's got to be both ways.
Misandry
Absolutely.
as well.
And lastly, last point, the cops don't enforce any of the laws. Who's going to enforce this then?
Well, I mean, I was looking at a story this morning in London Evening Standard about how there's going to be a meeting held with the Metropolitan Police and the heads of some of these gangs who are going around knifing each other all the time, right? And the idea is that they're going to talk to them and try and shame them into stopping.
Good luck with that one.
Right? So instead of arresting them, you're going to go, no, I want you to stop stabbing him because you should feel shame. Don't even get me started. Listen, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk to Ken, who's up in Newcastle. Hello, Ken.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Mike.
You're getting ahead of yourself.
Hi, Ken.
Good morning to you.
Yes, this misogyny situation, this supposed hatred of women, I believe is actually driven by hatred of men in many instances.
How's that?
There's an extreme feminist movement today attacking men, and it's driven, in my opinion, in some instances again, by the LGBT ideology.
Oh, yes.
This is a dangerous situation our nation is in today.
Who are these feminists? Do they have a name, though? Do they have an organisation, do you think?
No, it's a mindset that's taken over the nation, Mike. In my opinion,
yes.
I'm a Christian, and I believe that this is an attack against godly authority in the house. In the house.
What do you mean? The man should be in charge?
In the house, there has to be for example, you're employed by Talk Radio. There is someone.
I'm not actually.
Not for much longer.
No, you got that wrong. But anyway, carry on.
There has to be someone in authority in any business.
That's right.
There is someone who
can be a man or a woman, though.
Right, it could be a man or a woman, and I accept that. That's wonderful. But in the home, in the family, in the marriage unit organised and ordained by God, the man has been given the responsibility, not because he's better, but because God holds the man of the family responsible to...
Sorry to tell you, I'm sorry to break this to you, Ken. That's not the case in Dawn's household.
No.
I'm afraid she's very much the boss.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And as is the case in many other households.
I think most of you secretly like it, to be honest.
Yeah, I prefer to be dominated by a woman, to be honest.
I forgot the whip.
But you see, let me just speak a wee bit further on that.
All right.
You see, there is a general attack. For example, even today, the Archbishop is giving a political religious speech on the television. The Archbishop is supposed to be preaching about Christ and salvation. Now, in the family...
Yeah, he's not going to be talking about tax, is he?
We're talking about tax, but he's talking that you shouldn't be discussing that. He should be preaching Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I agree.
And this country needs to repent. But he's not doing that.
No.
Now, in the family, there's total confusion. Feminist attacks on men comes from the devil, in my opinion. The extreme feminists. It's driven.
That's quite an allegation, that.
Women of the devil.
Yeah, tell it.
Actually, I'm quite liking that one, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You got to be careful about the libel laws, Ken.
Libeling the devil.
Libeling the devil, exactly.
Listen, our country is in total chaos now, even when it comes to gender. There's only two genders, male or female.
Well, apparently that's not necessarily the case.
That is the case.
Not anymore.
That is the case, mate.
No, you've got to move with the times, Ken.
You can't move with the times.
Why not?
You get in trouble because you get in confusion and you get in total chaos. What is happening today in this country?
Why shouldn't somebody be able to... Hang on. Well, why shouldn't somebody be able to say that they don't want to be male or female? They'd rather be no gender.
Non-binary.
Why can't they say that?
They can say it if they like, but
well, there you go.
Absolute nonsense.
Well, you don't know that. You don't know that.
You can't be a man one day and a woman the next
Oh, you can.
day.
You can sometimes sing, I feel like being a woman today. Yeah.
I think you can, Ken.
Total nonsense.
I think you're stuck in the past, Ken.
You're either a man or you're a woman. That is the fact. Somebody who's not born with
it could be a hermaphrodite, surely.
There could be that.
Yeah. So there you go. See, there's already a third choice, the third way.
That's not a choice. You're born like that.
Third way. There is male or female, and this
Tony Blair used to say it was a third way.
Feminism is driven by the
he knew what he was talking about.
God's order.
Listen, I'll tell you what, I agree with you on one thing, Ken. I do agree with you that men are now a sort of endangered minority. There's no question about that. There's more women in the world than there are men. Men are now made to feel as if they're always wrong and never correct. Fortunately, I'm here to hold up the banner of masculinity and point out that, in fact, I'm never wrong.
Yeah, but the thing here, Mike, is this country is now in a state of anarchy and total confusion.
It's not that bad.
Because of women.
Why? Because we have turned away from the Bible and Jesus.
No, don't start with all that.
Been taken over,
it's too early for that, Ken. It's too early for all that, Ken. No, I don't want to get into all that. But very interesting call and some very interesting points. A lot of people would agree with Ken. I'm not one of them. But he is right to some extent that an awful lot of men are being made to feel in some way as if they're always in the wrong.
No, actually, and I agree. I do agree with Ken. I agree with you. And that's what I'm saying about legislating, more legislation between the relationships between male and female. It's going to make more and more people feel like, well, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong?
Exactly.
And it is always men.
And I'd have to say, I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that a woman walking down the street is any more harassed now than she ever was. And in fact, probably less. I mean, I walk around on the streets of this town quite a lot, and I do not see, as a general rule, on any given basis, women being wolf whistled at. I don't see women being harassed. And as I said to our guest Sian earlier, if I do see a guy harassing a woman, I'll tell him to stop and tell him to get lost, And I think most men would do that because it's a very, very small number of men who involve themselves in that kind of behaviour. And it isn't right, and it isn't good that women have to suffer it. But you don't need to legislate against it. Upskirting is a horrible thing to do. Let's get that law passed. Let's forget about trying to define misogyny because you can't define it in a legal manner. Yeah. And you won't solve any problems by making new laws.